The moment prosperity begins to slip through your fingers is rarely dramatic. It usually happens quietly in small moments where you tolerate less than you deserve, where you lower your voice instead of holding your ground, where you negotiate your worth in exchange for approval, safety, or temporary relief. Over time, these moments accumulate, shaping not only your external circumstances, but also the internal identity from which every decision is made. Many people believe they are blocked financially or spiritually, when in truth they are exhausted from constantly proving their value to a world that only mirrors the way they treat themselves. There is a deep fatigue that comes from trying to manifest abundance while carrying the hidden belief that you must ask, beg, or wait to be chosen. This fatigue is not physical. It lives in the nervous system, in the subtle tension of always needing reassurance, always fearing loss, always anticipating rejection. When this becomes your inner climate, the universe does not respond with punishment, but with precision. It reflects coherence. It responds to what you consistently embody, not to what you desperately request. Prosperity, in its most honest form, does not arrive when you finally convince the world of your value. It arrives when you stop arguing with yourself about it, when your actions, boundaries, and inner posture quietly declare that your life is not up for negotiation. This shift does not require force, arrogance, or performance. It requires a return to self-respect, so grounded that it no longer needs validation. In this journey, we are not chasing money, luck, or external permission. We are examining the inner agreements that have shaped your reality until now. We are slowing down enough to notice where imploring replaced choosing, where fear replaced clarity, and where survival disguised itself as humility. As this awareness unfolds, something subtle but powerful begins to change. The struggle softens, the noise quiets, and space opens. And in that space, prosperity no longer needs to be chased. It begins to follow. When imploring becomes an identity, there is a subtle moment in life when asking quietly transforms into imploring, and most people never notice when that line is crossed. It does not announce itself with drama or failure. It arrives through repetition, through the habit of tolerating discomfort a little longer than necessary, through the reflex of explaining oneself too much, through the silent hope that effort, patience, or kindness will eventually be recognized without the need to claim space. Over time, this posture stops being situational and becomes structural. It becomes identity. When imploring settles into identity, the individual no longer feels that they are choosing their path. Life begins to feel like a negotiation they are losing in slow motion. Opportunities appear, but always with conditions. Recognition comes, but never fully. Money arrives, but never stays. Relationships exist, but require constant self-erasure to maintain. From the outside, nothing seems obviously broken. From the inside, there is a quiet erosion of dignity that produces fatigue, confusion, and an unspoken sense of being unseen. This erosion does not come from weakness. It often comes from adaptation. Many people learned early that safety depended on pleasing, waiting, or minimizing their needs. They learned that asking directly led to conflict, rejection, or loss, so they became skilled at indirect survival. They became experts at reading rooms, adjusting tone, absorbing tension, and offering more than was asked in exchange for stability. What began as intelligence later solidified into pattern, and pattern once embodied becomes destiny unless consciously examined. Prosperity struggles to emerge in this internal landscape because prosperity requires a stable center. It requires a sense of inner authority that does not fluctuate based on approval or fear. Imploring, by contrast, places authority outside the self. It subtly communicates that value is granted, not inherent. That permission must be earned. That worth is conditional. Even when success appears within this framework, it feels fragile. The person remains alert, braced for loss, convinced that everything could vanish if they stop performing. There is an emotional signature to this state. It feels like constant low-grade urgency, a background tension that never fully turns off. Decisions are made quickly to avoid discomfort rather than deliberately to honor alignment. Silence feels threatening. Waiting feels unsafe. Boundaries feel risky. And so the individual keeps moving, adjusting, accommodating, hoping that motion itself will produce relief. Yet motion without grounding only deepens exhaustion. The universe, in this sense, is not withholding. It is responding faithfully. Life mirrors internal coherence. When imploring becomes identity, reality reflects instability, inconsistency, and conditional exchange, not as punishment, but as resonance. Prosperity cannot stabilize where the self has not stabilized. Abundance cannot anchor where value is constantly questioned. The external world simply amplifies the internal signal. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to recognize is that it often masquerades as virtue. It is praised as humility, flexibility, generosity, or patience. The individual may even feel morally superior for enduring more, asking less, and expecting little. But beneath this narrative lies a quiet grief, the grief of living beneath one's own capacity, the grief of sensing potential without permission to inhabit it, the grief of knowing somewhere deep inside that life could feel more solid, more reciprocal, more dignified. This grief is not dramatic, it is cumulative. It builds through years of micro-compromises. Each time value is discounted to keep peace, each time discomfort is swallowed to avoid confrontation, each time the self is postponed for a future that never quite arrives. Eventually, the nervous system learns to expect scarcity, even in moments of gain. Joy becomes guarded, expansion feels unfamiliar, rest feels undeserved. Prosperity does not require domination, entitlement, or force. It requires congruence, a quiet, embodied alignment between what one knows internally and what one allows externally. When that alignment is missing, imploring fills the gap. The individual tries to compensate for inner doubt with outer effort. They seek security through overgiving. They attempt to earn what can only be sustained through self-respect. Understanding this dynamic is not about blame, it is about clarity. The pattern of imploring did not arise randomly. It was adaptive once. It served a purpose. But patterns that once protected can later imprison. Prosperity asks for an evolution of identity, not an accumulation of techniques. It asks for a shift from survival-based interaction to value-based presence. The fastest path to prosperity is not through convincing the world to give more. It is through ending the internal habit of asking for permission to exist with dignity. When imploring dissolves, not through force but through awareness, something fundamental reorganizes. The body relaxes. Decisions slow down. Boundaries begin to feel natural rather than threatening. And life, sensing coherence, responds accordingly. Raising the standard without force. Prosperity begins to reorganize itself the moment inner standards quietly shift. This shift is rarely loud or confrontational. It does not arrive through grand declarations or sudden confidence. It appears as a subtle recalibration of what feels normal, acceptable, and sustainable. When standards rise internally, life responds not because it is impressed, but because coherence has been restored. What once felt like effort begins to feel like alignment. A standard is not a demand placed on others. It is a relationship with oneself. It is the internal agreement that defines how energy is exchanged, how time is valued, and how presence is protected. When standards are low, not by choice but by fear, life becomes negotiable. Everything feels temporary, nothing feels anchored. The individual adapts constantly, not because adaptation is wrong, but because stability feels inaccessible. This constant adjustment drains vitality, and prosperity struggles to grow in a field that never settles. Raising the standard does not mean rejecting humility or compassion. It means no longer equating self-respect with rigidity or selfishness. A higher standard simply reflects a clearer inner boundary between what nourishes and what depletes. When that boundary exists, choices begin to organize themselves naturally. Certain environments lose their appeal. Certain conversations feel misaligned. Certain opportunities reveal hidden costs that were previously ignored. None of this requires explanation or justification. It is felt internally as a quiet sense of clarity. The nervous system plays a central role in this process. When a person has lived for years in survival-based adaptation, calm can feel unfamiliar. Ease may even trigger suspicion. Expansion can feel unsafe, not because it is wrong, but because it challenges the identity built around endurance. In this state, low standards feel familiar. High standards feel threatening. The body resists not because it wants less, but because it fears the unknown. As standards rise, discomfort often appears before relief. This discomfort is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of transition. Old patterns dissolve before new ones stabilize. The space between them can feel empty, uncertain, even lonely. The mind may interpret this as loss, while the deeper intelligence of the system recognizes it as clearing. Prosperity requires space. Without space, nothing new can enter. What often surprises people is that raising the standard does not immediately bring more. Sometimes it brings less. Fewer interactions, fewer distractions, fewer commitments. This reduction is not regression, it is refinement. Life begins to shed what no longer matches the emerging identity. This shedding can feel like rejection if interpreted through the lens of imploring. Through the lens of self-respect, it feels like relief. Standards also influence perception. When inner value stabilizes, the world is no longer scanned for validation. Attention shifts from proving to discerning. Instead of asking whether one is wanted, the question becomes whether the exchange is reciprocal. Instead of chasing opportunity, opportunity is evaluated. This change is subtle, but it alters every interaction. Prosperity is not drawn to desperation, it is drawn to clarity. Raising the standard also alters the relationship with time. Urgency begins to dissolve. Decisions are no longer rushed to avoid discomfort. Waiting becomes tolerable. Silence loses its threat. The need to fill space with effort diminishes. In this slower rhythm, discernment becomes possible. Prosperity thrives in discernment because it reduces waste, misalignment, and burnout. Energy is conserved, focus deepens, direction sharpens. There is a common misconception that higher standards isolate. In truth, they attract alignment. While fewer people may resonate initially, those who do resonate engage more fully, more honestly, and more sustainably. The quality of connection improves. The quality of exchange stabilizes. Prosperity is less about volume and more about integrity. Integrity creates trust, and trust creates continuity. Internally, raising the standard restores dignity. Dignity is not pride. It is the felt sense that one's life is worthy of care. When dignity is present, decisions feel grounded rather than reactive. Boundaries feel natural rather than defensive. Presence feels embodied rather than performative. This internal environment becomes fertile ground for prosperity because it supports long-term growth rather than short-term relief. The universe responds to this shift with precision, not through dramatic signs but through subtle rearrangements. Timing improves, opportunities feel cleaner, negotiations feel clearer, obstacles reveal their lessons more quickly. Life becomes less chaotic, not because challenges disappear, but because the internal response to challenge stabilizes. Raising the standard is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to a version of the self that no longer bargains for belonging. When that return occurs, prosperity no longer needs to be pursued. It begins to recognize the field as hospitable, and in that recognition, movement becomes smoother, outcomes become more consistent, and life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a dialogue. Not because everything changes immediately, but because the inner reference point shifts. From this point forward, prosperity is no longer approached as something to earn through endurance. It becomes something that emerges naturally from a life lived with quiet self-respect. When the nervous system learns safety, there is a moment in the journey toward prosperity that is rarely discussed, yet it determines whether abundance can truly take root. This moment occurs not in the mind, but in the nervous system. Long before financial patterns change, the body must learn something new. It must learn that safety no longer depends on shrinking, pleasing, or staying alert. Without this learning, even the most promising opportunities feel unstable, and every gain carries the shadow of potential loss. Many people live with a nervous system conditioned by years of uncertainty. Even when life appears functional on the surface, the body remains braced. Muscles hold tension without awareness. Breathing stays shallow. Thoughts scan for problems that have not yet appeared. This internal vigilance is not a flaw, it is the residue of adaptation. At some point, being prepared meant being protected. Over time, preparedness hardened into expectation, and expectation became identity. In this state, prosperity feels foreign. Calm feels suspicious. Ease feels temporary. The body does not yet trust that stability can exist without constant effort. As a result, the individual unconsciously recreates situations that confirm what feels familiar. Deadlines tighten, conflicts emerge, resources fluctuate. Not because something is wrong externally, but because the internal system seeks coherence. It prefers a known struggle over an unknown peace. This is where many journeys toward abundance stall. The person understands the concepts. They recognize the patterns. They even experience brief breakthroughs. Yet the old tension returns. The cycle repeats. The missing piece is not willpower or belief. It is regulation. Prosperity requires a body that can remain present without bracing, engaged without urgency, and open without fear. When the nervous system begins to learn safety, something profound shifts. Attention settles, reactions soften. The impulse to over-explain, over-deliver, or overextend loses its grip. Silence becomes neutral rather than threatening. Waiting no longer signals danger. This does not mean passivity. It means responsiveness without panic. From this state, decisions become cleaner. Boundaries feel less dramatic. Value no longer needs to be defended. The relationship between safety and prosperity is subtle but absolute. Abundance flows most easily where the body feels allowed to receive without vigilance. If receiving triggers anxiety, guilt, or hyper-responsibility, the system compensates by creating reasons to give back immediately, often at personal cost. This compensation prevents accumulation. It keeps the individual moving, adjusting, and proving, even when success is present. Safety in the nervous system also changes the perception of time. Urgency fades. The future feels less like a threat and more like a horizon. Planning becomes grounded rather than frantic. Risk is assessed rather than avoided or impulsively embraced. Prosperity depends on this relationship with time because growth unfolds gradually. When the body demands immediate resolution, long-term stability cannot form. There is also an emotional maturation that accompanies this shift. Emotions no longer need to be suppressed or dramatized. They can move through the system without defining identity. Discomfort is tolerated without collapse. Pleasure is experienced without suspicion. This emotional flexibility supports resilience, which is essential for sustainable prosperity. Without resilience, success becomes fragile, and fear returns at the first sign of uncertainty. As safety deepens, self-respect stabilizes, not as an idea but as a felt sense. The individual no longer needs to convince themselves of their worth. It is embodied. From this embodiment, interactions change subtly. Voice tone shifts, eye contact steadies. Choices align more closely with values. Others respond differently, not because they are manipulated, but because coherence is perceptible. The universe responds to regulated presence with clarity. Situations unfold with fewer extremes. Opportunities arrive with less chaos attached. Challenges still appear, but they no longer threaten identity. This steadiness invites continuity. Prosperity grows through continuity, not through bursts. A calm system can sustain growth where a vigilant system exhausts itself. This chapter reveals an essential truth. Prosperity is not only a matter of mindset or action, it is a state of internal permission. Permission to rest without guilt. Permission to receive without debt. Permission to exist without proving. When the nervous system learns this permission, life reorganizes around it. The journey does not require perfection. It requires patience with the body's pace. Old patterns loosen gradually. New rhythms establish themselves over time. As safety becomes familiar, prosperity no longer feels like an intrusion. It feels like a natural extension of a life that has finally learned how to remain open without fear. This is where abundance stops being something hoped for and becomes something sustainable. Not because circumstances magically improve, but because the internal environment can finally support what arrives. When identity aligns with receiving, prosperity reaches its most decisive threshold when identity quietly shifts from endurance to receptivity. This transition does not announce itself as confidence or ambition. It emerges as an internal settling, a recognition that receiving no longer threatens balance or belonging. For many, this moment feels unfamiliar, even disorienting, because identity has long been shaped around effort, resilience, and self-denial. Yet abundance does not sustain itself in an identity built solely on survival. Identity is not defined by what one claims, but by what one allows. It is revealed in the ease or tension that arises when something good appears without struggle. If receiving triggers a reflex to justify, repay, or diminish, the identity has not yet adjusted to abundance. Prosperity requires an identity that can hold gain without contraction, that can accept expansion without retreating into guilt or vigilance. Much of this resistance to receiving is inherited. Cultural narratives often equate worth with sacrifice. Value becomes synonymous with effort. Rest is viewed with suspicion. Ease is interpreted as laziness or entitlement. Within this framework, prosperity feels undeserved unless earned through exhaustion. The body absorbs these narratives long before the mind questions them. As a result, receiving without strain feels unsafe, even when it is precisely what is needed. When identity begins to align with receiving, the internal dialogue changes. Success no longer demands explanation. Support no longer feels like weakness. Opportunities no longer feel like traps that must be managed carefully. Instead, they are met with presence. This presence allows discernment without defensiveness. It allows gratitude without obligation. It allows appreciation without self-erasure. This alignment also transforms the relationship with control. The need to micromanage outcomes softens. Trust replaces hypervigilance, not blind trust, but embodied trust rooted in self-respect. When identity is stable, uncertainty becomes tolerable. Prosperity grows in this tolerance because growth always involves the unknown. A rigid identity resists the unknown. A receptive identity accommodates it. Receiving also alters relational dynamics. When identity is anchored in worth rather than scarcity, interactions become cleaner. There is less negotiation for approval, less performance, less emotional bargaining. Exchange becomes mutual rather than compensatory. This mutuality supports prosperity because it fosters sustainability. Relationships no longer drain energy to maintain equilibrium. They contribute to it. Internally, aligning with receiving heals a long-standing tension. The tension between wanting more and believing one should accept less dissolves. The inner conflict quiets. Decisions no longer oscillate between desire and guilt. This coherence frees energy. Energy that was once spent managing contradiction becomes available for creation, refinement, and growth. The universe responds to this coherence with subtle affirmation. Timing improves. Delays feel purposeful rather than punitive. Progress feels organic rather than forced. Prosperity begins to flow through pathways that feel surprisingly simple, not because complexity disappears, but because resistance diminishes. Where there is less resistance, movement becomes smoother. This chapter also reveals a paradox. Receiving fully requires vulnerability. It requires allowing oneself to be seen without armor. Many resist this because armor once ensured survival, yet armor also blocks nourishment. Prosperity cannot penetrate what is always defended. When identity relaxes its grip, vulnerability becomes strength. It signals readiness. It signals capacity. As identity aligns with receiving, gratitude deepens. Not as a performance, but as a natural response to sufficiency. Gratitude stabilizes abundance because it grounds awareness in presence rather than lack. It does not cling. It does not demand. It acknowledges without grasping. This quality of attention invites continuity. What is appreciated without fear tends to remain. The final integration of this shift is subtle. Life feels less urgent. Choices feel less loaded. The future feels less heavy. Prosperity is no longer imagined as a distant rescue, but experienced as an unfolding process. There is patience without resignation, ambition without desperation, vision without anxiety. This alignment does not eliminate challenges. It transforms how they are met. Challenges no longer threaten identity. They become part of a larger rhythm. The individual remains intact within them. This intactness is the foundation upon which prosperity stabilizes. When identity aligns with receiving, the need to implore dissolves completely. There is nothing left to negotiate. Value is assumed, not argued. From this place, abundance does not need to be invited. It recognizes familiarity. It enters naturally, and when it enters, it stays because it has found a field capable of holding it. Where prosperity finally settles, prosperity was never meant to be chased, negotiated, or begged for. Throughout this journey, one truth has quietly revealed itself again and again. Abundance follows coherence. It follows the moment when the inner world stops contradicting the outer desire, when imploring dissolves, when standards rise without force, when the nervous system learns safety, and when identity aligns with receiving. Life reorganizes itself with surprising precision. This is not because the universe suddenly decides to reward effort. It is because the internal signal becomes clear. When self-respect is embodied rather than conceptual, choices change. Boundaries stop feeling dramatic. Silence loses its threat. Waiting becomes neutral. And in that neutrality, discernment emerges. Prosperity grows in discernment, not urgency. What once felt like bad timing begins to look like misalignment. What once felt like rejection begins to look like redirection. What once felt like scarcity begins to look like a lesson in self-abandonment that no longer needs repeating. The struggle softens, not because life becomes easy, but because the internal posture becomes stable, and stability is the soil where long-term abundance takes root. There is a quiet dignity in no longer bargaining with one's own worth. It does not require dominance or withdrawal. It does not demand explanation. It simply exists as presence. From that presence, relationships recalibrate. Work reorganizes. Money flows with less friction, not magically but logically. Life responds to the frequency of what is consistently lived, not what is occasionally hoped for. Perhaps the most important realization is this: prosperity is not a destination. It is a relationship with time, with value, with rest, with boundaries, and with receiving. When this relationship matures, abundance stops feeling fragile. It no longer needs constant protection. It no longer triggers fear of loss. It becomes integrated into identity rather than hovering outside it. Nothing discussed here asks for perfection. The transformation described is gradual, organic, and deeply human. Old patterns loosen over time. New rhythms establish themselves quietly. What matters is not speed but consistency, not force but honesty, not performance but embodiment. And as this embodiment stabilizes, a subtle peace emerges, a peace that does not depend on outcomes, a peace that allows prosperity to arrive without anxiety and remain without tension. This is where the journey settles, not in accumulation, but in alignment, not in proving, but in being. From this place, abundance is no longer pursued. It simply accompanies the life that has finally stopped imploring and learned how to stand. Before this video ends, pause for a moment and reflect deeply on what you have just heard. Ask yourself this question with complete honesty. If prosperity were to fully arrive in your life today, would you be able to receive it without shrinking, apologizing, or feeling the need to justify your worth? Or would something inside you still feel the urge to negotiate, rush, or give yourself away in exchange for safety? This question is not meant to pressure you. It is meant to open awareness. Awareness is where real transformation begins. And this channel exists for one purpose only: to guide you through that inner realignment with clarity, depth, and respect for your lived experience. If this message resonated with you, if you felt seen in ways that words rarely touch, consider subscribing to this channel. By subscribing, you are choosing to continue this journey of self-respect, coherence, and sustainable abundance. New videos are created to support this inner shift, not with noise or empty promises, but with grounded insight and continuity. As the screen transitions, allow yourself to stay present. The next video waiting for you on the end screen continues this conversation, deepening the themes of alignment, identity, and prosperity that no longer requires struggle. Remain with the process. Let it unfold at its own pace. And remember, abundance does not follow those who implore. It follows those who finally allow themselves to stand.